having me. Like Joel said, my name is Justine Gamble. I currently work at UVU in their People and Culture department. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also just want to share a little bit about how I got invited to speak today, because it really just shows how good Charles is at all the stuff that he's teaching you. We were actually both ambassadors in the Prospective Student Service Office at UVU, but we were at different times, so we didn't ever cross over. But a few months ago, they had an event where they did a panel. They invited a bunch of previous ambassadors to come and present to the current ambassadors, and we were talking about the importance of networking. And Charles goes, hey, let's do this in action. Hey, Justine, I have a week where I need a presenter on HR. You work in HR, you want to come? And I was like, sure. And then everyone cheered, and it was awesome. And so he's never going to ask you to do something that he has to do himself, and it really is really important to be able to build that network and make those connections. But when I was asking him what he wanted me to talk about today, one of the things he really emphasized is sharing my story and kind of how I got to where I am today and the different roller coaster of a path that took me here. Like you said, very few people I have found are like, I want to go into HR. It is my dream job, me included. And so a little bit, if we go back a few years, so I grew up in a very, very orthodoxly religious home. I was taught from a very young age that I shouldn't go to college as a woman, that I just needed to get married and have kids as soon as possible. And if anything, it was like, go to college just in case your husband dies, right? Like that was the messaging that I got. And so for a really long time, when I was even thinking about going to college in general, I wanted to become a dance studio owner. And so my dream, I was going to go to BYU, I was going to be a cougarette, and then I was going to maybe graduate. We'd see, maybe get a major in dance and a minor in business. And so that was my plan up until I graduated high school in 2015 from Harriman High School. Then I was in college for a little bit. I was a dance major. And in high school, I had actually gone to Haiti, and I had taught dance in Haiti. And that gave me a passion for traveling and helping people. So for a while, I wanted to be a dance anthropologist, which is basically where you go to different countries and you research how dance affects culture. So I wanted to do that for a little bit. Then I served a religious mission. I went to Kentucky for 18 months, super exotic. And while I was there, and then when I came home, I decided I wanted to switch my major to PR, or public relations. I had no idea what that was. I just thought it sounded really cool, and I knew I didn't want to do dance anymore. And I also was in the ambassador program. I was a manager, and so I was planning retreats and trainings and presentations. And I realized I actually really loved creating positive and impactful experiences for people. And so I decided I wanted to be an experienced consultant, basically somebody that goes into companies and plans retreats and activities for teams. And then in 2018, right before I graduated from college, I got the chance to go and stay up at one of the really nice, fancy resorts up in Park City. And I was like, this feels glamorous. I think I want to do this every day. And so I decided I want to be a PR director for one of the fancy ski resorts in Park City. And my very last semester of college in 2019, I was meeting with my counselor in the Career Development Center. And I was like, okay, what else do I need to do? I got the grades, I'm about to graduate. And she's like, you should do some job shadows just to make sure that's actually what you want to do. So I took her advice. I did 2 job shadows, one at the Montage and one at the Waldorf Astoria with their PR directors. And after those, I was like, well, crap, I would hate that job. I actually do not want to do that anymore. So I was a little bit lost. I was about to graduate, had no idea what I wanted to do, knew I didn't want to do PR anymore. And my partner at the time, he was actually the HR intern at UVU. And he's like, hey, there's a training and development position opening up in the HR department. You'd be really good at it. You have training experience from being in the ambassador program. You should apply for fun. And so that's what I did, and I got the job. So I literally kind of fell into HR. It was like a backup plan. It was really the only thing that was available at that time. And I've been doing it for 5 years, and it's literally my dream job. And so let me tell you a little bit more about what that journey has looked like. So I did go on to get my master's in learning experience design, which is basically training and development. In my job, I get to do a lot of public speaking. I get to do keynote speaking. I give workshops and trainings on leadership skills and different processes for employees. Bottom left-hand corner here, I do all of new employee onboarding. And so I do all of the new employee orientations for new employees. I build all of the guidebooks and checklists and stuff for new employees. We also host a lot of events to help employees feel included and appreciated at UVU that I help run. So we'll do free tickets for employees for their family to go to a basketball game or a Nordra event, or we'll rent out movie theaters for them and their family. We celebrate employees when they hit their 5, 10, 15, 20 plus year anniversaries. We do like retirement events, and so I get to help with those. This one's probably my favorite project I've worked on. This happened just this last November, and I was in charge of organizing and running our first ever Working Mothers Conference. And we did that because we were analyzing employment data, and we found that women were leaving employment at UVU at a disproportionate rate to men. And we were looking at our exit survey data, and we found that the big reason for that is because they didn't feel supported as working moms. They had societal, religious, cultural pressure that working dads didn't have. And so we decided to have this conference. We had keynote speakers, we had breakout sessions, support groups, and we had a lot of discussions with our administration and executives on things that we could do to make UVU a better environment for working moms, which was really, really fun. This is one of my leaders. This is the Vice President of People and Culture in Maryland. She's phenomenal, very supportive, really good at recognizing our team. We've been able to make a really big impact and be recognized at a national, regional, and university level for the work that we've done. I also am part of the Professional Association for Campus Employees, which is kind of like a staff union. We don't have unions at UVU, but it's like the staff voice on campus. And so I'm the chair of employee recognition, where I get to run the different staff awards that we have. So this is a picture of me going and delivering one of those awards a few weeks ago. And then just in general, like, we get to have a lot of fun and create those positive experiences even within our own team. So this is my team that I work with. We go bowling a lot at UVU. We'll do rock climbing, pickleball tournaments. This is from an activity I did as part of a kind of leadership development cohort that I was a part of. And I also get to do coaching across the university, which is super fun. I get to meet one-on-one with employees, with leaders, and with executives, and do employment and workplace coaching, which I love, and just a lot of strategic planning in general. And so it's a lot of different things, but really going back to when I was in college and I realized that I like creating positive experiences, ultimately that's what I get to do in people and culture, which I was not expecting when I went into HR, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. And it really all comes down to this principle, which is that as employees, you will dedicate a massive amount of time to your future employer. I mean, at least 40 hours a week, right? If you work full time, if not more. And you're probably going to spend more time with the people that you work with than your family, unfortunately, in the culture that we live in. And because of that, because you're giving so much time and energy, you deserve to have a positive experience while you're at work. And that is the goal of people and culture or HR departments, is to create those positive experiences and make it as good of an experience as possible. So now I want to kind of open it up a little bit, and I want to know kind of what vibe you all have about HR, what preconceptions you've had, what experience you've had with HR, what media representation you've seen about HR. So let's get like 3 comments of people. Yeah, we'll start right here.
My major is human resources.
Hey, yes.
I just picked it because it said like in 2026, it was one of the fastest growing like careers. So I was like, oh, if I have a degree someone wants when I graduate, that might be great. Is there anything like inherent to you that you feel like that really stands out in the HR field?
Ooh, really good question. So I'll talk towards the end about some qualities that can make somebody a good fit in HR. I would say the 2 that come to mind, one is strategic thinking. So not always just doing the same thing that we've done for the last 100 years, right? Being able to look at, and the second thing is data analytics, which goes together. So being able to collect data, do research, focus groups, surveys, and really figure out the next best way to do different processes, whether that's hiring trends or training trends. So always thinking about how you can do things better would be how I answer that question. But I love seeing an HR major in here. That's awesome. Yeah.
So HR sometimes has the stigmatism having to deal with, I don't want to say cruddy employees, but
the problem ones, yeah.
Ones, right?
Yeah.
Have you had any experiences like that?
So the role that I have, luckily I don't have to deal with many of the problem employees, but we do have a team in HR usually called the employee relations team, and that's their job. They're kind of like the mediators, the like subjective third parties that help. If you have a problem with your manager, with another coworker, they help facilitate some of those harder conversations. So there is some of that in HR, but it's just like one like one piece of the pie, I would say. But that is definitely, I think, a stigma, like you said, that you go to the principal's office, right? Like HR is the principal's office of your workplace and you don't want to get sent there. So yeah. Okay, one more. I think I saw another hand. Yeah.
Yes, work at the Amazon warehouse in American Fork, and with HR, like she just answers any questions, and she just helps people. I think it's about people, helping people, and bringing that positivity, as you said. Unfortunately, the HR is like very organized, I think, with computers and stuff, and trying to make sure like where everything is concrete and tell you how it is.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah. Well,
Career pay and everything. Also, you said you were working like resort PR or something? Or?
Yeah, so my background is in public relations. I like to say that HR is just internal public relations, because public relations is you're trying to determine and kind of influence the public's perception of your organization. HR is you're trying to kind of influence your internal employees' perception of their experience. And so it's a lot of like transferable skills, which is really cool. But I'm glad that you've had a positive experience at Amazon. And yeah, HR, one of their roles is to make the processes as clear as possible, to answer any questions. And so wow, you all of the presentations I've done, y'all have had the best like positive experiences with HR, so that's good. I'm surprised nobody brought up Toby from The Office. That one usually comes up, right? This is my favorite one. Says, man, somebody doesn't like HR. What did you do to him? And Toby says, nothing. And Michael Scott says, no, he tortured me with his awfulness. So sometimes that's the perception of HR, right? But ideally, there is a shift happening. So I think in the past, HR, I mean, human resources, when you think of that term, it's very like, I don't know, I don't love that term. It's like humans are just a resource that you use until they're dried up and they can't work anymore. That's why there's a big shift happening in the industry towards people and culture, which is the idea that you're trying to help people grow and build positive cultures. So let's do a little true or false, see what you all know about people and culture, or HR. So you should each have a green and a red piece of paper, unless you came in late. And so I'm going to put up a statement, and if you think it's true, raise the green one, and if you think it's false, raise the red one. Pretty easy. First one, most people who work in HR have a degree in HR, true or false? Okay, we got some true, we got some false, a little bit of mix. It is false, actually. So in my division of 40 people in people and culture, I only know of one that has a degree in HR. It can set you apart if that's like something that you want to go into, having a degree, but a lot of people, like Charles mentioned, not very many people are like, I am so passionate about HR when they're in high school, right? Like that's not usually what people are thinking about. So even just on my immediate team, so my degree's in public relations, my supervisor is international business, my vice president is information systems. On my immediate team, I have experience design, psychology, and healthcare administration. So really just like any business, people, communication degree can set you up for success in HR. Second one, HR leaders are part of strategic business conversations, true or false? All right, I see a lot of true, and that is correct. Ideally, you was on like the board of directors or the board of executives at most companies. You'll have a vice president of HR. They're part of all of those strategic conversations. Even me in my role, I've presented to our executive board at UVU multiple times about strategic directions and ideas that we want to take for our employees. So definitely a strategic role. Okay, true or false? Only large companies have HR departments. False, that's correct. So the industry average is about one HR employee for every 100 employees. And so if you have less than 100 employees at a company, you might have like outsourced HR or no HR employees. But usually once you're getting into the hundreds and definitely thousands of employees, you'll have an internal HR department. All right, HR jobs are in demand, true or false? We kind of talked about this. It is true. So I actually teach adjunct in the School of Business. I teach the Intro to HR class, and our department chair recently sent out a link, and it was like the top 10 jobs that are kind of be growing in the next few years in the entire world. And of the top 10, 3 of them were HR jobs, HR related. And so definitely a growing industry and in high demand. All right, most HR is outsourced to other countries, true or false? We got a little bit of true, a little bit of false. It is false. So the industry did go through a little period there for a while where it tried to outsource and it did not go super well, especially because as the company gets bigger and you're trying to remain competitive and just compete with other companies, you need to have really tailored HR concepts. So things like benefits should be tailored, training, compensation. You want to have somebody that's in-house. And so they're very much moving away from outsourced HR. I don't think I know of a single company that does to outsource to other countries anymore. All right, there are professional HR certifications, true or false? It is true. You got that one. So there's SHRM, which stands for the Society for Human Resource Management, and then there's one called HRCI, which is the HR Certification Institute. You can get certifications through, and that can help elevate you in the HR world. True or false? HR roles can pay 6 figures. And the money. It is true. So it definitely depends on the public versus the private sector. The private sector entry-level roles are going to be anywhere from like 55 to 60 grand, and you're going to move your way up pretty quickly into the 6 figures. Even in the public sector where you don't make as much, even at UVU, multiple employees at UVU in our HR department make 6 figures, yeah.
How long does it take to get to the 6-figure digit?
I mean, it depends on how ambitious you are and the company you work for. I would definitely say like in the startup world is going to be your best bet, because usually it's starting off really small and they expand really quickly. So they take their current employees and they promote them really quickly. So if you get into the startup world, it can be a year or 2 and you can get into the 6 figures. In the normal companies, I would say 5 to 10 years to get to 6 figures. So not too bad, pretty average for the business industry. Okay, HR employees do marketing projects, true or false? True. So a huge part of my job, I would say about half of my job, is marketing. And whenever you're implementing a new employee process, you need to market that process to employees. So it's developing communication campaigns. I mentioned I'm in charge of all of our guidebooks. And so we have new guidebooks for employees. I do all of the graphic design and marketing for those resources. And so really a lot of the jobs, even if you're in like benefits or compensation, you're going to need to be communicating different information to employees and marketing that in an effective way. So there's a lot of transferable skills. And then last one, HR only works with employees when they have an issue. True or false? Yeah, that one is false. Like I said, we do have some subsets of HR that work with employees that are having problems, but most of the time you're just working with your day-to-day employees, hiring employees, onboarding them, training them, helping them out with questions. Okay. So let's talk about a couple of different options for different types of roles in HR, and it's going to depend on what type of company you work for. So the first type of company is going to be a large company. This is going to be something like UVU or like Amazon or a company that has thousands of employees. And these teams are going to have a lot of HR employees, and they're going to do more specialized work. So you're going to have somebody that just does benefits or just does onboarding or just does recruiting. They're going to be very specialized in their work. And then I already mentioned startups. These kind of companies, they're probably going to have a few employees at first, and it's going to grow really quickly. You're kind of doing it all with very little guidance if you work for a startup, because it's a startup. Smaller companies, this is where you're going to have more generalized work. So this is a few hundred employees to maybe 1,000 employees. You're going to have only a few HR employees that are kind of doing a little bit of everything. It's very general. And we'll talk more specifics about this in a second. And then you can go into HR consulting after you've been in HR for a while, and that's where you make the big bucks. That's where companies pay you to come in and just give advice on either generalized or specialized HR work. You can kind of choose your specialty. So let's talk about the large company experience. Basically what this looks like is your entry-level jobs are going to be specialists. And this is where, like I mentioned, you might be a benefits specialist, where all day, every day, you're working on benefits processes for employees. And benefits are things like your healthcare, your retirement, dental insurance, those kinds of things. So you'd be focusing on those for employees. Then you might have HR business partners, which are going to be almost embedded HR people in different units. So think of The Office, right? So Toby works for corporate. He works for Dunder Mifflin, but he's embedded in the Dunder Mifflin branch. He'd be like an HR business partner where he just does all of the HR for that unit. You'd have HR managers, which oversee one area and all of the specialists in that area. So you'd have like a training manager or a compensation manager. Then you'll have an HR director, which oversees multiple different aspects of HR. So for example, example, my supervisor, he's the director of culture and talent. And so he oversees the culture, training, and talent team. So he has like multiple areas he oversees. And then at the very top, you'll have the vice president of HR or the chief human resource officer. They're the ones that are going to sit on the like board of executives and be that really strategic person that oversees all of HR direction. So what would a day-to-day look like? As we'll just give the example of a compensation specialist, an entry-level role here. You would meet with your team and review current assignments and projects. You'd answer emails about salary equity processes, put together salary recommendations for new positions and new hires, deliver training on how to give good or how to do good job descriptions, answer calls from vice presidents about reorganizations that they want to do, and then input data into market surveys. So you can see here that while the topic is the same, right, compensation for all of these things, there's still some variety in the type of work that you would be doing. Now let's talk about the small company experience. And so again, this is going to be 1,000 employees or less. The entry-level position is going to be a generalist. And it's a generalist because you're doing a lot of different things. You're going to just do kind of all of the day-to-day HR stuff. And then above you would be an HR manager or an HR director, and they're just kind of in charge of all HR processes. So the day-to-day here, as a generalist, you'd probably process payroll for each pay period for all the employees, host new employee orientation once a month, do the packages and stuff for new hires, post positions on job sites, do recruitment for open positions, coach a manager through having a hard performance management conversation with an employee, submit a request for proposal for a new benefits vendor, and then answer just general employment process emails. So again, a lot of different things. You're not just focusing on one aspect of HR, you're doing a little bit of everything. So really good question was asked earlier. What makes you a good fit for HR? What kind of can make you stand out if you're wanting to go into HR? Couple different things. The first is education. So almost every single full-time HR job is going to require a bachelor's degree. But like I mentioned, that can be in really anything. And I'm sure you all have talked about this in this class, but a lot of jobs don't really care what type of degree you have. They just care that you have one. And HR is another example of that. You could be a digital marketing major or a sociology major. You could still have a successful career in HR. In general, people skills, and this can be a variety of different type of people skills. Maybe you're somebody who loves standing up in front of people and giving presentations and trainings. We would have jobs in HR for you. Maybe that like terrifies you and you would hate that and you'd rather sit one-on-one and kind of coach people or walk people through processes. Or maybe you just are really good written communication and good at helping people through email. All of those are really good skills to have in HR. I also mentioned this one, data collection and analysis is really important. The industry is definitely moving more towards this idea of using data to make educated decisions for employees. I even mentioned with the Working Mothers Conference, that came about because we were looking at termination and exit data. And on that list that the department chair sent us that had the list of the most kind of hot up and coming jobs, number 2 on the list was an HR data analyst. Like in the entire country, number 2 highest like growing job as an HR data analyst. Another one is strategic thinking, like I mentioned, being able to look at things and see how you can do them better. And then last is just general good communication skills, whether that's verbal or written, just being able to be clear and concise in how you communicate things to employees. Okay, so just to wrap up here before we do questions, our vice president says this all the time and I really love it. And it's that the organization can never be what the people are not. So if you want to have a successful organization, your people have to be successful. If you want to have a healthy and profitable organization, you have to have healthy and well-paid employees, things like that. And so whatever industry you end up going into, always think about this, especially if you're wanting to like be an entrepreneur or be in management. A big aspect of the success of companies is how well their employees are doing. So that is all the information I have. What questions can I answer for you all about people and culture, about HR? Yeah.
So from my past experience, I've seen that in HR, there tends to be a lot more women than men. Is that true?
Yeah, that is like an industry trend. I can't really tell you why, but it does tend to be more women than men. I think it's evening out right now, but yeah.
Most of my bosses, just like the higher ups, have been women, whereas like I'm more on the hands-on stuff, technical side. So that's just kind of what I've seen as far as work.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I don't know like the why behind that, but I have noticed that as well. Yeah.
What would you say your biggest struggle that you have faced like in HR, like, or the big struggle that you see that people that do HR like come across?
I would say one of the things that I run into is that a lot of HR employees, they assume that because they are an employee, they know what's best for every employee, and they don't do enough research or data collection or getting feedback on the different initiatives that they're doing. And so that's something that we've really tried to work on, especially at UVU recently, is whenever we make any change, whether that's how we're going to do compensation the upcoming year or a change to benefits, we start like doing focus groups and surveys, and we look at like industry trends and actually doing research to make those decisions instead of just making them based on how we feel that day. So I'd say that's probably the biggest barrier that I run into is past decisions that have been made that were not well researched. And now we're having to kind of deal with the consequences of that and make the changes to better align with what people actually need.
One of the previous speakers we had talked about emotional resiliency in this line of work. Does that seem like something you need to exercise, when talking with employees?
Oh, for sure. I would say emotional intelligence in general is super important when you're working in a job that works with people, really any job. I would say different aspects of HR, depending on what direction you're going, that would be more important than others. So for example, if you're in employee relations where you're navigating and mediating those really hard conversations, emotional resilience is really important because you're going to be having really emotionally draining conversations. And so being able to not take that personally and not take that home with you would be more important skill. Where my job, I do a lot more of like trainings and working with employees that want to grow and professional development. And so it's less important in my role because I'm working with employees that are normally happy and doing well. So it just kind of depends on what route you want to go in HR, how much of a toll emotionally it would take on you. So yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah, speaking of the different routes you can take, you mentioned the HR data analyst is kind of a big up and coming role. I was wondering if you know much about what the day-to-day projects look like for that. What kinds of is it usually in the bigger companies that they do projects to support the rest of the HR team and gathering the information they need, or what does that look like?
Yeah, really good question. So I think that those skill sets can be used in both the small company and the large company. Small companies are probably not going to hire a specific data analyst. It'd just be part of like the generalist or the HR manager's job. In bigger companies, that's where they're going to hire more of like a data analyst for HR. And they're going to look at a lot of different things. They're going to look at hiring trends and seeing if there's discrimination happening or if there's certain like talent pools that we're not tapping into and different routes to tap into those. They're going to look at like doing different surveys for like onboarding and how you can improve the onboarding process. They're going to look at termination data and why people are leaving the institution and what things that we could do or we could implement to improve that. They look at compensation data to see if there's equity issues, to see if everything's fair. There's a lot of numbers surprisingly in HR. And so if like numbers and math and statistics are something you're passionate about, HR might be a pretty good route. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
I just have one more question.
Yeah,
So in your presentation, you talked about how HR kind of goes over like the pay for people and like creating new jobs or whatnot. Like how percentage, like how big is the HR in that decision making? And like is it all of them? Like how much of that decision making is them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, really good question. So it depends on the organization. I can talk about UVU a little bit. So basically the process is if you want to have like a new position, you have to go through what's called PBA, which is our planning, budget, and assessment process, where you submit a proposal saying, I need funding for a new employee. This is the type of work they're going to be doing. And that will come to our compensation team. Our compensation will then go out to market data, be like, okay, so for people that work at similar institutions, that have the same level of an education that's required and similar types of responsibilities, what's like the pay range? So then they'll go back to the supervisor and say, okay, we found maybe you should pay this person 70 to 80 grand. And then it's up to the supervisor and their budget, kind of where they pay in that range. So HR gives like a recommendation of a range based on their research, and then the supervisor decides how much of their budget they actually want to use for that. But it depends on the institution. Some institutions are going to be like what HR says goes, and sometimes it's generally just up to the supervisor. But their job is mostly to do the comparison. And sometimes they'll also look in that department, okay, are there other similar jobs and how much are they being paid so that there's equity, so that there's not inequity issues between like new employees and older employees. So there's lots that goes into it. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah.
I have a question about diversity advocacy, because there's this thing in HR where diversity, equity, inclusion, there are not quotas, but there kind of are. There's this protocol that a lot of companies are trying to institute diversity hires. What's that been like on the inside, and how has that debate played out? And then does HR, are they the ones advocating for diversity advocacy, or is that other parties, and then HR just has to try and sort through it?
Yeah, a lot of these questions are really tricky because it totally depends on the institution. Again, I can talk about how UVU does it. And so at UVU, we have multiple different roles that look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have Rasha Kadisat. She's our Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer. Her name was just changed because of the new bill that was passed. Now she's the Chief Engagement Officer. But she was kind of in charge of that for the whole university. Then you would have Tara Ivey, who's over it for students. And then you have it's kind of broken out and distributed. And then we have an inclusion committee. So there's lots of different voices. I'm on that committee. So a lot of things are being changed right now with the new DEI bill that was just passed in Utah. But in general, I would say the approach that we've taken is looking at, especially if we're talking about hiring and looking at quotas and stuff, we do not have any quotas for race, gender, any of those kinds of things at UVU. What we look at is the pools that we're hiring from. And so what we'll do is we'll say, okay, Utah, if we look at race, for example, Utah is 80% white. Are our applicants 80% white? If maybe it's 90% white. Okay, maybe there's some discrimination happening in our advertisement or in our recruiting, and we need to be better at recruiting to diverse populations. Or maybe we're 60% white, so we might be discriminating against the white population in our recruiting, right? And then we look at our actual hiring pools. Are we hiring about 80% white? And if we are, that's a good indicator that there's not discrimination happening, because it's representative of the populations that we're hiring from. So it's not something where we want to say we want 15% Hispanic, 15% Black, 15% white, right? That would probably mean that there's discrimination happening if it's not representative of the pools that we're looking at. And so same thing when we're looking at awards or training certifications, we're just looking at the pool of gender statistics or race statistics and making sure that it lines up with that. And if it doesn't necessarily mean 100% that there's discrimination happening. It's just a red flag. We'd probably look into it a little bit more to see what's going on. So for example, going back to the termination data, UVU has 50% employees women and 50% employees men, but about 60% of the employees that leave the university are women. And so because that's 10% higher than we would expect, that's when we would then look and say, okay, maybe there's something happening here. Again, it's not 100%, but let's look at the exit survey data and that kind of stuff. Does that answer? It's really tricky. It's a hard conversation.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating.
You have to have a certain amount of ratio when you...
No, officially, but in the private sector, there's
some people do.
Some controversial hiring practices on both ends of the spectrum. So you have as old as nepotism, where you've got all the senior executives are hiring their families to replace positions. That's a lack of DEI at the grossest level, right? Yeah. And then on the other side, like Justine was saying, sometimes there's too much attempt to basically
tokenize. You're tokenizing. It's we're hiring you because you are this gender, not because you're qualified. Or we're hiring you because you're this race and not because you're qualified. And that hurts everybody in that process. And most people you talk to that fall into those minority populations, they don't want that either. They want to be hired because they're qualified. So that's why we look at the pools of people and making sure we're aligning with that versus having set ratios and those kinds of things. Yeah.
So just going along with that, so say I lived in a state that didn't have a DEI bill in place. As the basic, just white male, how would I set myself apart where these DEI requirements are in place outside of the state to give myself a chance, because I'm the basic, most common type of person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say just in general, really learning how to highlight your skills and highlight your education and doing the same thing that I think everybody wants to do, which is doing the best that they can. And then if you are in a state where DEI is really important and that's really important to the company, even just articulating in your interview how you have helped other people succeed and how you are passionate about or care about helping other people succeed can help you fit into those cultures if that's the type of institution that you want to work for. But yeah, I think that really ties into this idea that's really important to research the companies that you're applying for and seeing A, if you'd be a good cultural fit, if they have the same values that you do, and B, if they do, being able to tailor like your resume or your interview answers to their values to make yourself stand out and align with what they're looking for. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. There's not like a super great answer to that, but.
Plug for 3890, that's exactly what we do. We talk about how to convey, maximize the value you have and how to demonstrate that you're a good culture fit for a company that you've researched and invested in. And so ideally you are giving yourself the best shot regardless of these things. And again, the pendulum just swings back and forth. And so it's something that you have to be aware of. But on an individual level, like if you're concerned about you getting positions, the career strategy we focus on will increase your odds significantly of getting hired.
Yeah, and I also say, going back to the idea that there's a balance, right? Where I think there's this balance in recognizing that we shouldn't necessarily have quotas or just hire somebody because of their race or their economic status or fill in the blank for whatever protected class. But we also should recognize that certain people face certain barriers based on some of those protected class identifications. So the one I like to talk about is economic status. Like I don't think anyone would argue that somebody comes from a really wealthy family has more opportunities than somebody that was raised by a single mom on food stamps, right? Like, and that those people that are raised in those situations probably need a little bit more help from institutions, like through scholarships or financial aid and things like that, than somebody that was raised in a wealthier family. And similarly, people that come from certain racial backgrounds or certain gender backgrounds face different barriers. Even me talking about like my background being raised as a woman in a religious community, like it was ingrained into like my soul that I should not go to college. And that was a barrier that like my male friends didn't have to cross. And so it's really important to recognize those barriers and implement resources to help people cross those barriers while being careful that we're not tokenizing those people or like just giving them things because they're that identity. I don't know, it's a really tricky balance. Like Charles said, it's a pendulum that I think everyone's still trying to figure out the balance for. Yeah.
What's like the biggest challenge that you've seen in the HR employment job, like you especially?
Me especially. I would say working with other departments, which like kind of sounds bad, but because we work at such a big institution, we have 6,000 employees, and so we're like our HR team like can't do it all, right? And so like I'll work with like the marketing team when there's marketing projects that I can't take on because I don't have the workload, or we'll have IT programs that we need to build and we work with the IT department. But because those teams are also getting a million requests from other areas, becoming a priority for that is pretty hard. And so sometimes you just have to like wait to do the projects that you want to do or implement the processes you want to work on because you're having to wait on other teams. So I would say that's probably the biggest barrier that I've faced, biggest challenge. That's gonna be any institution, yeah.
What specific HR courses would you recommend for us to take?
Ooh, if you're interested, we have the Intro to HR course. The only prereq is statistics, I believe, and you can get that wave to take it at the same time if you want to. So that's a course that I teach right now, and that just goes over like every aspect of HR at like the very basic level. You'll spend a week on recruiting, you'll spend a week on training, on compensation, on benefits, and just see if that's something you're interested in. And then if you are interested in it, we have a minor and we have a major in HR. They have classes on like training and development that you can focus on training if you want to go into that world. They have compensation and benefits is just one whole class, so you spend the whole class talking about that. HR information systems, talent and recruiting. So take the Intro to HR class if you want to learn more about it. And then from there, you can kind of specialize if you want to by taking some of the other classes. Yeah, great question. Okay, great questions, great discussion. Y'all, those are some challenging and good questions. Thank you for that.
For her amazing presentation, let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you all.